Hi there. In this video, we are going to be going over the various settings for the dungeon generator. So let's go ahead and begin that. All I've done here is I've created a new project and plopped it into it. It's a blank project. So um, as you can see, we got our little dungeon here, and I'm going to start going down through the settings on the right hand side. So let's go ahead and collapse all these nodes. All right, first one, generation options. You can choose to generate instance meshes, or if you want, you can have static meshes. By just unchecking that box, it will take a second, and these are all static meshes now. So that's what that does, and you can see instant meshes are a lot faster. Spawn in editor, if I turn that off, it will not spawn. Good if I want to edit the code, because it's not constantly regenerating it. This just basically turns it off in the construction script. All right, so seed. This is the seed for the project, or for the actual build. If you saw in my third person video, the seed is tied to the dungeon. It's actually in this instance of the dungeon. So if we make another instance of this dungeon by just dragging Alt and dragging that out, and scoot it over somewhere. Let's put it over here. And if we had these two connected, this one can have a completely different seed than this one. So let's go ahead and move them separate. There we go. So these have two completely different seeds. And I do not have a playable character in this, so I can't play it to show you the two differences in multiplayer, but that's what third person video is for. So basically, we have the seed. Now, if you are doing cutouts in some of your rooms, then you can do this to generate the middle section, which is the cutouts only. So you notice by generating the cutouts, it does not change the actual build of it itself. So let's go to, just jumping ahead a little bit, let's go to tiles, cutouts, and put some cutouts in. All right, so now if we generate a new cutout seed, we can change around the cutouts in the room without, and you notice it doesn't affect the other one, without actually affecting the entire dungeon build. Same thing with the door seeds. If we have doors turned on, which we do, we can get a new door seed. Now, it won't affect it because I have it spawning them on the entrance of every room, but let's change that real quick. I know we're jumping ahead. Let's change it to where it's spawning them in the corridors now. And if I generate a new door seed, it will change where the doors are located in the corridors and which corridors have them and so on and so forth. So those are worth checking out. And it does this without generating an entirely new seed. The first section of the seed is actually the rooms. So if you see, we just regenerated an entire seed. And if you regenerate the rooms, it actually affects everything else. The cutouts don't affect the doors don't affect the cutouts. So you can generate those as you like. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the cutouts do affect the cutouts. Yeah. So I was right. Okay. Moving on. Spawn. If you want a random spawn spot, you can check that. It will find a valid floor tile anywhere in the dungeon and randomly spawn you on that floor tile. That's all that does. That will probably need to be edited depending on your project because you'll generally want to spawn a player start object on that location. And if you have multiple players playing, then you'll want to have multiple player starts. So this will vary from project to project, but as it is right now, what it will do is when you spawn in the dungeon at your player start location, it will teleport you to a random spot. So that's what that does. Tile settings. You can choose in here a bunch of settings that are related to tiles. If we want to have a rectangular grid or a hexagon grid, it's our choice. I'm going to go ahead and remove this to speed things up a bit. So you can choose hexagon or rectangagon. Scale. Default scale is set to 2 because the Unreal Engine mannequin likes hex scales at a scale of 2. You can set the scale to 1 for rectangular if you want to, but the Unreal mannequin has an issue getting through because of the size that I set. It has an issue getting through the doorways. You can see how it's kind of tight there, which is smaller than a square would have been. and its shoulders gets caught. So that's why I set the default to 2. You can change that as big as you really want, and make the dungeon much, much bigger. And then obviously, you know, if we play it, we can get a perspective here. Oh, our camera's really slow because it's way up there. Our tiles, our character would be like this, and the tiles would be pretty big. So, let's see what else. Go back to the beginning of our dungeon here. All right, so that's the scale. Padding is the padding between cells. You can hit 0 and have a nice flush look where everything's nice and clean. It especially looks good in the rectangular version. So everything's nice, clean cut, all that. No delineation between the different tiles. You set your padding to 1, you get a little bit of space. You can obviously set that much higher if you like. You can set it to 20 if you wanted to and have your people fall between them. I don't know. But anyhow, that's the padding. By default, I set that to 1, just to give a little bit of a differentiation between tiles. Height variation, if you want to use this, it'll actually shift up the floors and make them a little bit varied. So that's kind of cool looking, but I don't know what practical application it is. I tried to think of, you know, everything I could possibly think of for people using this, so that's just one. You can change your floor tiles to be whatever you want. It does use material instances, but it also uses materials. So if I want to just use a green material or a solid material, and if I wanted to have them be transparent, I could do that as well and have them be a transparent material. And it's kind of hard to tell in this, but that is actually a transparent material, so you could see below it, like a glass floor, for example. Let's set that back to something cool like black. Let's make it gray, because pretty soon we're going to be changing the walls. No, I don't want them to contrast like that. Let's make it a mirror floor. Okay, good. Now we got mirrors. That's awesome. Okay, so next up's cutouts. This is kind of advanced under tiles. You can choose to have cutouts or not. We showed that a little bit earlier, where you can generate cutouts separately from the actual room and the doors. But if you turn on cutouts, you can set a cutouts modifier, which kind of modifies the amount of cutouts that's in the room. If you want more, you just run that up. And I think a maximum is 2 is what I put on there, but you can obviously release that maximum in the settings or in the blueprint itself. That's just what I have it hard coded to. So to do that, you would go into the blueprint, go down to your variables, and find the tile settings and set your cutouts, tile settings cutouts, and you would set over here the slider range. You could set that to a much higher range, and your default value you could set to a higher default value. So that's what that is. Okay, next up, aggressive tiles, aggressive cutouts rather. If you check aggressive cutouts, it can cause problems where the entrance may have a cutout there. What it'll do is it'll allow the cutouts to go to the edge of the room, which could be unfavorable, especially if you have it set to pillars instead of holes. If you have it set to pillars, as we saw over here, we had a cutout in front of the door somewhere, right here. You cannot go through there. Good luck. That is an inaccessible room, and there's probably others. There's an inaccessible room, and there's an inaccessible room. It does not differentiate between doors. I've got some coding in there to try to, but if you have it set to aggressive, kind of overriding that code saying, hey, I want it to go to the extents of the room, and yeah. So that's a thing. I still left it in there just in case. Because if you wanted to have a room by itself, for example, and you just wanted to spawn a room with no doors, with let's say you wanted Tactics Ogre style. Let's do that real quick. A room that is 60 by 60 with walls turned off. There you go. You got a Tactics Ogre-ish room. Let's set the height variation to 10. Let's jump that up to 50. Nope, too much, 25. And let's randomize the pillars and holes and make them aggressive. There you go. Obviously, this is not tied to a tile map, a height map of any sort. So you could actually tie this to a height map. I may do that in the future, but that's just to give you an idea there. So let's boom. Rooms, 10 by 25. It's going to take it a second because those are some pretty big rooms it's got to generate. 10 by 25. That'll get it down to a manageable level. And let's go ahead and change our tiles back to something cool. And our tiles, room settings are good. Wall settings, generate walls, and let's make them different again. So let's turn off the height. And let's turn off the cutouts for going forward. And let's go ahead and while we're here, change it to hexagon because I like hex grids. Okay, so there we go. We got our rooms. I don't want to try to skip around too much. Quarter settings. You can generate quarters or not. Not generating quarters is kind of handy if you have one room, but you know, I don't know unless you're doing like teleports from one room to the other. This might be handy, given the very sizes. You know, the rooms aren't consistent in size, so you could teleport and you could have cutouts and stuff like that. So generate quarters you can turn on and off. And then we have different methods of generating corridors. Direct and BFSA, that uses breadth first search. It's a different way of generating them. There is no benefit either way. The results are going to be exactly the same. I left them both in here for you to consult in the blueprint. Maybe your build will require something a little bit more complex, and you'll need to go with a breadth first search and use that algorithm instead of doing a direct connection. Direct connection establishes a corner and endpoints and directly connects the two. Breadth first search takes a start point and an endpoint, which in this case is a corner, and it'll build the fastest path or the shortest path between A and the corner, and then the corner and B. But the results will be the same between the two. Then you got BFSB. BFSB is not compatible with doors because it does cause doors on rooms, because it can sometimes cause orphan doors because of the way that they generate. So BFS version B takes the shortest path between 2 points. It does not create a corner, so it will always choose the shortest path between point A and point B, which leads to some pretty interesting designs. So that's the choices. If you have doors turned on and switch it to BFSB, it will turn your doors off, you see here. At rooms. You still have doors in the corridors, but it won't place them in the rooms anymore. Let's see, we're under corridor settings. Did I skip the wall? I did. I skipped the wall. You can generate walls or not. You can set the wall height to whatever you want the whole wall height to be. You know, some really high walls, it's going to be kind of crazy. You got some really high walls. Trying to find our door in there. There's our door down there. Oink. I think I went too far. There's the door. Ooh. I do not have ceilings yet, but if you wanted to have really high walls, you could do that. It's the... And then obviously the wall material can be changed. I think I showed you that earlier, but so we can do that. That's a thing. Okay, getting back to quarters. Generate quarters or not. Then the algorithm used to generate the actual quarters. Then a branching chance. If you want to branch, if you set it not to branch, it will create a linear dungeon. Start A, end B. If you choose branching, every so many rooms, which is defined by the threshold, every 5 rooms, 1, 2, 3, well, it doesn't like my math for some reason, so I noticed this many times before. It's like, it's using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's saying, okay, we have 5 rooms. Now go back and randomly find a room. So what it does is backtracks, it finds a room and it creates a branch off of that room. So it's not exactly every 5, but for every 5 rooms, it can backtrack and create a branch. That's what that means. 50% is the likelihood of it making a branch. If I set that to 100%, then obviously we're going to have more branches. If I set it to 25%, it may not even make the first branch there. We got an extra room out of that. That's interesting. So that's the chance of it actually branching off. That's all there is in there. Going on to doorways, whether you want to generate doorways or not. We'll have to zoom in a little bit for this one. You notice there's quite a few, and that's because my chance is high, but we'll get to that in a minute. Generate doorways or not. You can choose to have open quarters. Generate doorways, you can choose to spawn them at the room ends. So where a corridor meets the room, it will attempt to spawn a doorway. There are cases where it will not be able to in some occasions, but generally it will attempt to spawn a doorway, and the easiest way to do that is for us to change this material so that it stands out. There's our doors, and I don't like that glow when I'm doing demonstration, so let's turn that off. Ooh, that is really bright. Okay, black walls. That works. Good contrast there. All right, so doorway settings, you can spawn them at the room or in the corridors, and you can see the little red dots. Those are your doors. Choose to spawn the actual doorway itself or not. I clicked on the map and went crazy. Let's put them back in the room so we can see this a little bit easier. There is no door there, and the doorway is just a transparent door that it puts in the way. So you can choose not to or not, and you can change the color of that material to whatever color you want. I've got a transparent material in there for you. Under advanced, this is pretty handy because you can actually check the use percent and it will generate that percentage of doors. So if I set it to 100, it's going to generate one in every room. It's going to attempt to generate a door at the entrance. If I set that to 50%, about half of our rooms will end up having a doorway. And obviously this comes in really handy when you're not spawning them in rooms, because it will randomly determine where to spawn them. And you can set that percentage down lower because it's basically spawning the exact same number of doors in most cases as there would have been, but this will create less of them. And you can drop that number or raise that number up as much as you like. And if you set it to, say, 50%, again, we can backtrack a little bit. As soon as it gets done calculating, I dragged that, which means that it has to calculate for every point that I increase that percent chance. This is going to take a little second. It's because I have this running on generation that it does that, which is annoying. Okay, so 50. That's where this comes in handy to turn this off, and you can make all your changes you want, and then you turn it back on, and it only has to spawn it once. It doesn't have to go through the math every single time. So you can do that to reduce the number of doors that you have. And it will still occasionally spawn them near the doorway, but not in the doorway. And again, like I said, we can backtrack a little bit here and go back up to the seed. If you don't like the seed layout and you want to actually save this dungeon, you can just click new door seed and it'll generate the doors in different locations until you find something that you like. door settings. I think that was all with the doors. So moving on to other, these are some other things that I implemented that, you know, you may or may not want to turn on or off. Diagonal rooms, if you turn that off, it'll always create a straight line between rooms. It will not create rooms in diagonals. So that could be handy for some people. Top-down functionality, I showed this in the top-down video just a little bit. You can turn on teleport on click, which when you click on a cell or a tile, it will teleport your character to it. Obviously, you want to put some pathfinding behind that. It just teleports you right now. And highlight cells also will highlight the tile that is underneath the cursor. And this is the material that the highlight uses. Diagnostics, maximum retries is it applies across the board. There's a lot of things that this applies to, but to give you an example, the number of times that it will attempt to do anything before failing. This helps to prevent orphan rooms, orphan doors, things of that nature. So I set that to 10 to give it 10 attempts to redo itself. Here's another good example is corridors. It will attempt to establish a location on this axis and on this axis and a corner point to make a door. If it tries to make a corner point here, this room's actually occupied, which we'll show in a little bit. We can show the occupied rooms or cells, big cells, not the tile cells, but the room cells. If that one is occupied, it will attempt to do it on this side, and it's going to choose a random spot on that wall, a random spot on that wall, and it's going to generate that corridor that way. If we decrease this number, it gives it less attempts, or increase it. It changes the number of attempts that it will make to make that connection. So what this does is it affects, like, if you have cutouts in this room and it's trying to generate a room corridor and there's a cutout right here, it will give it more attempts to make a connection. You don't want to have that too high because it can go kind of crazy, because this is not the only calculation that uses this, but we'll attempt to make a connection again and again between these two rooms until it finds a spot that is suitable. And if not, sometimes it will generate one where there's a tile. So that's where that is. Display corridors. Display corridors basically highlights your, well, I have a bad choice of color here. Let's change the floor tile to black. All right, display corridors will highlight your corridors on the map, wherever the corridors are. This used to be really handy when they intersected rooms, but I took most of that code out to where it will actually truncate the corridors when they intersect rooms together. So this is kind of a little bit irrelevant now, but if you do for some reason have like your walls turned off and you want to be able to see where the corridors are, you can actually highlight those corridors. You can highlight occupied rooms. If you turn off your walls and you turn on highlight occupied rooms, this is basically a grid of grid coordinates. Each room, based on your maximum room size, is in a grid position. So there's, go back to our start here. There's 0, 0, -1, 0, -1, -1, or sorry, positive, let's see, what would that be? -1 on the x-axis and 1 on the y-axis, and then -1 on the x-axis, -1 on the y-axis. These are room positions, and the little walls that it puts in place are showing you which rooms are taken, are currently occupied. That's all that does. It's helpful. I put those markers in place for some calculations later. If you want to add boss rooms or something like that, you'll want it to recursively check each tile that it's going to occupy to make sure that it's not a potentially occupied spot before spawning one. Dungeon start and end will identify the start and end points of a dungeon with a little highlight there. You don't have to have walls off to see that. You don't have to have walls off to see any of these really, but it just makes it a little bit easier. That will highlight your start and end of the endpoints of the dungeon. And I think we have reached the end. If there's any other questions that you have, please post them and give me a nice little review, honest review, you know. and honest comments. And I'd like to see what you have done with this, or what you can think of that could be done, or some ways that I can improve it, or so on and so forth. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.